No, it's okay. Nah. Okay, yeah. Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to this webinar today. Cybersecurity in Africa's climate sector in the AI era. I'm Chanzu Lidaga, IT solutions engineer and venture builder here at Persistent, and I'll be your moderator. Um, Persistent is currently Africa's basically just a sec. Yep, Persistence currently we invest in and support impact-driven businesses across the continent, basically helping them scale solutions in clean energy, e-mobility, and the climate-smart agriculture sector. Right. Um, we work in partnership. We do consult for a fund, the EEGF fund, who is managed by Triple Jump, who was on the call today. And to kick us off, I'd like to briefly hand over to Gaetan, who will introduce our collaboration with Triple Jump and the EEGF. And so, Gaetan, I think this is the time that you can unmute yourself and go for it.
Yes. Thanks, Chanzu. And hi, everyone. So happy to give a brief overview of Triple Jump and the Energy Entrepreneurs Growth Fund before we dig into the meat of the day. So we are an impact-focused investment manager that has been operating in emerging market for over 18 years. We are headquartered in Amsterdam, but we have presence in regional office through Latin America, Asia, and also Africa and Eastern Europe, and we manage a bit over 1 billion of assets and still growing over three business lines. The first one is financial inclusion, is really where we have been historically active at the inception of the company, but we also do fund of fund, investing mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, and also direct investment. As of today, our direct investment are mostly focused on renewable energy, and EEGF that we're going to discuss about is one of the two mandates that we manage on that front. So we provide financial support to the companies across different variety of instruments and also technical assistance. And indeed, if we look at EGF more specifically, where so that Triple Jump manages by that persistent advice, it's a mandate that's really dedicated to providing support to renewable energy companies in sub-Saharan Africa, also a bit in India, by really helping them to bridge the gap between early stage venture capital and more commercial investors at a later maturity stage. And we do that by providing funding in four verticals. So the first one is the solar home system, SHS sector. Then we also invest in the CNI sector, the productive use, and finally what we call enablers, which are basically the tech companies that support the overall ecosystem. So we do that by providing up to 10 million tickets, predominantly debt. We also do a bit of equity. But in addition to this financial support, we also emphasize on providing operational support to our investees in two ways. The first one is the technical assistance that I mentioned before, where we really do capacity building across our portfolio. And the second one is engine room support, which I think is a bit of specificity of EEGF, at least for now, where we partner here again very closely with Persistent to really provide hands-on operational support to our portfolio companies in core areas of their business. So it can really be on a lot of different topics, HR, IT, finance, and even cybersecurity that I think we're going to discuss today. The idea being here again to help them reach the next maturity stage and bridge the gap with the next round of funding. So I think that's in a snapshot, but happy if you have any questions, do reach out, and I'll be happy to take them at the end of the call.
Yeah, thanks, Gaetan. And many of our partners and portfolio companies increasingly relying on digital platforms and data artificial intelligence. And I think one of the things we've been able to work on with portfolio companies in EGF has been cybersecurity. So today we are bringing together an expert panel to unpack the risks in this sector, the climate sector, share practical strategies for resilience, and also engage with your questions as well to any of the panelists that you're going to see today. So a few topics before we dive in. This session is being recorded, so hope that's okay with everyone. And use the Q&A box to submit your questions anytime. Okay. So let me now introduce our distinguished panelists. As you can see on your screen, we have our first one, Benjamin David, the co-founder and CTO of Masunga, a company behind PaygOps. Benjamin has built tools that thousands rely on in the field today, many of which are always exposed to cybersecurity threats. Benjamin, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add or introduce yourself better.
I think you did it perfectly. Indeed, we build tools like PaygOps that many people in the solar sector use to manage their operations and flow of payments for microloans.
Thanks. Next is Ashley Woodhall, the founder of Practical Infosec. Ashley brings a practitioner's lens to this conversation. He has a deep experience in training, simulations, and securing mission-driven organizations against real-world threats. Ashley, anything you'd like to add?
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Joining us as well is Richard Neil Richardson. He's the co-founder of Cyber Alchemy. Neil works on AI-enabled defense strategies globally and has enabled organizations design cybersecurity into their operations and digital systems from day one, basically from the onset. Neil, over to you.
No, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm doing a good job. And finally, we have Tukam, my colleague and one of our partners here at Persistent. Tukam leads investments and venture building across sub-Saharan Africa's climate and tech ecosystem. In this session, he's going to be offering an investor's perspective on why cybersecurity readiness is now crucial to the reputation and growth and resilience of companies in this climate sector. Tukam, anything you'd like to add?
No, thanks for the great intro. I mean, I almost wondered what you were talking about me. Sounded so good, but quite excited to be on the call, and hopefully, we can contribute meaningfully to the conversation. Thank you, Chanzu.
Okay. Cool. So without further ado, let's start. Let's dive into the conversation. Let's start with how technology is reshaping the cybersecurity landscape. And I'm going to start with Neil. Given your background in AI security and advising regulated sectors, how are AI and emerging technologies changing the nature of cyber threats and defenses globally, specifically, and also specifically in the African and energy climate sectors?
Thank you. Yeah, well, basically, as we all know, there's a lot going on. I mean, change in the modern world is fast, but the last 3 years have been increasingly fast, like beyond anything I've ever seen before. And what we're seeing is, bringing the cybersecurity angle, is all new technologies, AI is getting put into them, rightly or wrongly. A lot of it, in my opinion, is being rushed. And what we're seeing is a lot of failing fast, as they call it. Companies trying to put AI into companies, into apps, into product, in some cases, into national infrastructure. And what we're seeing is, a real wave of innovation and really cool, interesting things. But also what we're seeing is all the interesting challenges that brings, and it's starting to bring sort of AI making decisions on things that maybe it shouldn't make decisions without human oversight, but it is allowing that rapid change. Two of the things that I'm seeing a lot of already is, one, the impact on, from a cybersecurity perspective, social engineering, and that's across the world. The world into today's connected world, social engineering attacks they're ever present. And what AI is doing, on one hand, is it's making it easier for attackers to target people with deepfakes, voice deepfake, video deepfakes, even the phishing emails. They're getting better because the tools are allowing them to write and create better campaigns. And then all the way to another side, in the technical world, we're going into a world, particularly new energy world, where agents, drones, EV cars, and things. And because these are all new technologies, they're getting packed with technology, and that technology, again, with the AI angle and cybersecurity angle, is becoming a bigger attack surface. So I think, to summarize, the attack surface is increasing across the board, whether that's social engineering, sort of, or in the world of sort of energy, all the innovations that are coming in is increasing the attack surface, and we're going to have to step our game up from a defensive point of view. Oh, you're muted.
That's the age old. So Benjamin, as someone also who does digital infrastructure, do you have anything to add to that? Or maybe I should ask, how has AI and new technologies, changed how you approach both threats and preventions in the tools like PaygOps, right? I mean, they've mentioned, deep fakes and what have you, specifically to the climate-focused company in remote settings for you.
Yeah, indeed, and I think it's totally right to say that like AI is starting to being used for like social engineering and as well for generating deep fakes, and we will start seeing things like fake IDs with actually real data, but then the picture might be changed to the person coming to the shop, and so it becomes increasingly important in that context to be able to have a bit more control on identity verifications. And there are places where it's possible. So for example, if you look at Kenya, like the IPRS database for verifying identity gives you actually not only the verification with the name and surname of the person, but also pictures that you can actually verify against a picture of the person that's physically in front of the agent. And that kind of like checks of having the agent take not only a picture of the ID card, but actually take a picture of the person, and verifying that against the government database becomes increasingly more important when it is quite easy to generate a national ID that is fake, but with the real name, real national ID number, and just like the pictures that's been changed or things like that. So that is definitely a challenge because this kind of things used to be very difficult to do, as this kind of fake, and now with AI it becomes really easy and will become much more common. So I think it's something that software provider needs to be really proactive in, like improving their method of identity verification as well through OTP and other tried and tested methods.
Yeah, interesting. So you're saying older methods of verification are no longer as reliable, right?
Exactly.
And
like
so
you cannot just like trust that the ID card that has been given to you, even though the ID number matches the government database, you cannot trust anymore that it's actually a real one coming from a real person.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. We were seeing also, I saw a Spyro, I think is one of the companies we have talked to or worked with. And we had this website, that it looked exactly like a website where they would sell their electric bicycles, right? And people would even go and buy them from there. So it's very easy to copy a site, make it as original as possible in a very short time. So that's also something I can think of. Interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Like threat amplification is something that we see, like those kind of attacks used to be something difficult to do, and now it's something that becomes more common because it's easier.
Yeah, I agree. And to come from an investor and a venture builder's lens, how do you assess such risks, right? How do you weigh the promise of innovation against the threats that it might introduce? Because you can see, these innovations might be good, but as we see, they also do introduce some threat factors. How do you weigh this against the promise of innovation, basically? Is it even a factor to consider?
Yeah, no, I mean, you do, right? Because, I mean, before I jump into, right, promises and I guess the trade-offs, but, just to add a bit to the conversation around, right, that in many ways, right, a lot of what, I'd say we meaning, both Persistent, but also I'd say, other investors, a lot of why we're able to do what we do is because of innovation, right? And so, but I think as people pointed out, of course, innovation, these days, since a lot of it is, involves a lot of internet, if you think about all the things we invest in, there's always some component, right? Communication. I think maybe that's a better word. There's some element of communication that, the good side of that is that it makes things efficient. It, you know, drives innovation. You know, you think about some of the stuff we do, whether it's in e-mobility or, you know, SHS, that, you know, you have agents in fields that are able to communicate with, you know, HQ or central location because of, you know, internet and all that stuff. But of course, right, that also creates opportunities for, let's say, bad actors, so to speak, right? So I think what we try to do is that, I think, start with the opportunity, right? So look at, you know, what is it that we find interesting as an opportunity, but then as part of that due diligence process, but also if we invest after that, you know, there is a bit of an assessment of what are some of those risks, right? And I would say now, probably more so than in the past, I would say, because it's in the past, I mean, you know, a lot of what we're talking about will probably fall, some, not all, on their ESG, but it wasn't as big of a focus, but now it's incredibly important, because one of the things that as an investor, you worry a lot about is waking up and finding out something you invested in is in the newspaper. You know, I mean, the example you gave, right? Imagine if you invested in that and you wake up, say people have been swindled out of money that they thought they were buying something they're never going to get, or that, you know, and I've had experience in other contexts with this, right? That something malfunctioned and somebody took out money, right? Or information was leaked that then, you know, I think the last person talking was, you know, talking about, you know, information, for example, is leaked or somebody steals it and then something happens. Right? So those are the things that, I mean, as an investor, you're very, very concerned about. And so when you're investing, as I said, at least for us, you know, you try not to make that the focal point of your assessment. You look at the opportunity, but I would say that you don't lose sight of that fact. It's part of your DD, which a lot of our tech team, right, so including Chanzu, does sort of a very good job at. But also that after that, you know, you try to make sure that a lot of these basic safeguards are in place to minimize, right? Because trade-off, right? You can never, it can never be zero risk, right? But that to make sure you've done the best you can. And one of the things I would say we probably like quite a bit is if you're looking at folks who take responsibility, right? Who take ownership, because I think my sense often with these questions is people, you know, everybody thinks it's somebody else's job, right? That, you know, and that's not the case. So I think that's a few thoughts in that regard, Chanzu.
Yeah, I'm completely agree. So you're saying the takeaway here is, you know, there's investments used, innovation can be good, but they do bring with them risk factors that we need to also keep doing, because the payoffs of a cyber attack, can you imagine, can be great for an investor. Yeah, thanks, Tikom. And Ashley, to you, having worked directly with smaller purpose-led teams, right? Are your clients responding to these emerging AI-enabled threats like deepfakes, social engineering, or automated phishing in the way you'd expect? And you say they are prepared to deal with this especially in the African impact sector. Would you say that they're aware of this and they're expected, they know what to do?
Good question. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily on top of knowing how to approach it from a security point of view. No. As Neil said, and a few other people said, things are moving really, really fast, too fast maybe for everyone to catch up. And I think one of the things that I wanted to mention as well from an AI point of view is that we're sharing more data than ever with AI. I have friends that are using ChatGPT as their therapist. And it's becoming part of all of the tools that we use today. I mean, Google keeps asking me every day to turn on Gemini, for example. And I think small businesses in particular don't necessarily know what are the risks. It's a wonderful tool. I think, as Tukum says, it's the key to innovation, and people are going to use it whether we like it or not. So as people in security, I think we have to just help them almost use it well. And that doesn't necessarily mean saying we need to run security sessions and training sessions, but perhaps help tech teams and users of small and mid-sized organizations to use AI effectively and make sure security is a part of that training. I think if we just focus on security, they won't understand how it's important and how they benefit from that. So I think that's really important. The other thing that organizations can do if they have the money and they have the appetite to is they can purchase like a subscription model which doesn't share the data back to the AI tool. So that's another thing that just keeps anything that's sensitive within the organization doesn't leave the organization. Because we're talking about sharing code, sharing personal data, sharing emails with ChatGPT so it can help us, right? And we don't want that data getting lost. We can't trust these companies too much at the end of the day.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a good take, and it's interesting you say that, because according to the persistent cybersecurity research, whose publication has been actually shared with our attendees here, 90% of SMEs right now lack basic security protocols. Right? This is, we're talking about basic, like an antivirus, to even be simple, right? And with that, considering that also we are seeing a lot of uptake in AI assisted coding, it's becoming the norm now. So I mean, yeah, there's need for training, as you're saying, a lot of re-education, and how we approach some of even the legacy ways of dealing with these threats. Cool. I mean, it's a good segue to our next sort of, let's say, discussion topic, which is looking into the infrastructure realities right now, right? So we're having e-mobility rising in popularity. There's a surge of PaygOps mobile phones. We're having a lot of field agents also working with apps, and the use of IoT as well is on the rise. Most of our companies are either, especially in the CNI and SHS, we are seeing a lot of IoT, smart meters, and things like those. Let me start with you, Benjamin. What vulnerabilities do you see in this type of remote ecosystems? And what has worked? What do you think has worked to reduce risk, if at all? Right? Your platforms work with remote agents, and I know they do connect hardwares every day. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. I will start actually with the hardware part, because I think that's where a big part of the risk actually is. Those connected devices. So we see a lot of like connected solar kits. Someone, I think, Spiro, we are like connected e-bikes, connected solar pumps, a lot of connected like IoT devices that are remotely controlled to ensure payment and to ensure functionality. And those devices, often due to cost optimizations and performance limitation in their embedded systems, use much less secure like method of authentication, and sometimes they don't even use like basic encryption, no HTTPS, nothing like that. And that to me is a major risk, because potentially it's exposing credential, or it's exposing customer data. And even when it's done well, often the firmware and the devices are not updated very often. So they have like outdated library, like outdated SSL libraries that might have vulnerabilities. There is mitigation, but the main mitigation is when the products are designed. So companies designing the solar kits, designing those products, need to be aware of those risks and take them seriously. That sadly hasn't always been the case. Thankfully, I don't think we had any major events in the sector, but there's definitely a risk there that needs to be taken seriously by those hardware manufacturers, because I think there's currently a large attack surface with an important risk. In terms of the agents, I think the important thing here is ensuring that the agent, like the distributed workforce, has up-to-date, like very basic thing, just like up-to-date devices. And that's something that's not always followed. We often see agents are still using, Android 5 from 15 years ago that has like a lot of security gap. And another thing is ensuring, when possible, that the agents have like basic security trainings themselves. And that's actually like one of the real weak points that we see, is like few of the organizations that have groups of agents are providing them with basic cybersecurity training, even simple things like choosing a good password for their phone, not leaving the phone unlocked on a table at a cafe or things like that. And there are things that we can do on our side. For example, in our app ourselves, we have like extra layer of protection. So even if the phone is unlocked, when they try to access like sensitive client data or things like managing accounts on the app, they need to have a secondary login with a second PIN and verify. We do other verifications, but the training of the workforce themselves, something that's, I think, quite important.
Yeah, the user is always the weakest point. I agree. And you did mention something about, making sure that your OEM systems or devices are correctly patched. For small organizations that are coming up, is this easy to do? Or do they need to really vet their, OEM providers, or do they need to be proactive in uploading the patches? What's the easy fix in 1 minute, or less?
That's not always an easy fix. I think the important thing here, like if I could give one general advice quickly, is especially for the smartphone, tries to buy brands that do offer support and like regular updates, and same for software providers. So like try to go for sort of well-known software providers and well-known brands that will like provide you with support. And if you're doing your own software, make sure that you have like a team that's like day-to-day looking at patches and ensuring that anything in your software supply chain is always up to date and like check for vulnerabilities, which is a complex job.
Yeah, thanks for that. Let's over to you, Ashley. Field operations often lack, dedicated IT staff. And how can small organizations, having worked with them in quite a number, with decentralized teams, such teams, improve their digital hygiene and safeguard these mobile endpoints?
Really difficult, I think, that one, actually. From what I've seen working on the project a few years ago with Persistent and looking at the African SME landscape, I think there's a big use of the field agents. So in some cases, hundreds or maybe thousands of field agents, which of course, financially speaking, becomes very difficult to buy them company-owned devices or to even have them utilize Google Workspace accounts or Microsoft accounts, because that becomes very expensive when you scale up the numbers. So I think from that point of view is that there's a lot of potential fraud there, because you don't have visibility of the devices, you don't have visibility of the use of the data or the business systems that the field agents are using. And I think it also becomes really tricky to revoke access to certain data and accounts, because they're using their own personal accounts in many cases. So if the field agent leaves the company, you don't necessarily know that you've revoked the right access and data from them. So I would say the easiest thing to do, which is not the cheapest thing to do, is to give them some kind of business account that you have access over, or some kind of mobile device management solution which you can revoke access. If not, it's super important to be careful with user permissions and making sure that these field agents only have exactly the access they need and nothing more, to kind of restrict any potential consequences there. And having a strong process in place to make sure that access is removed to business tools and data as soon as they leave the company.
So doing some initial work in user management and also consider including this thought process when you're designing the softwares. It's just not a login. And okay, and I assume this will also apply to any backend information like access to API keys and things like that. To be more technical. Okay, good.
Absolutely, yes.
That makes sense. That's clear. And I'm just wondering, for Neil, are these device level security practices or architecture choices that specifically companies in this African climate often overlooked, basically? What's the one thing they should be doing today, considering what Ashley just said?
Oh, the one thing, that's a sort. We always say in cybersecurity there is no silver bullets. There's no kind of single solution. But what I would say is, across whether it's companies in the UK, Europe, Africa, what we see is call it maturity, cybersecurity maturity. The problem is you've got countries and companies and entities within all areas of the world, and they're all at different levels of maturity in terms of their security, and that's both for people and for technical things, whether it's firmware in devices or whether it's individual agents in the field. There's like a scale of maturity, and the biggest challenge we face in the globalized world is that the attackers can be very good. So you get an asymmetry where you've got attackers who are very well sort of seasoned and skilled, and they turn their attentions on companies, organizations, and individuals who are less mature in their security. It becomes a big challenge. And there's loads of areas we can focus on to raise that maturity. But ultimately, it always comes back to the people, and that whether it's the skills those people have and those awarenesses. And what I would say for all the stuff we've said about AI and the negatives today, whilst you'd never trust AI 100%, I would advise you not to, is when there is no other option for education and you have an AI bot there that can provide some user awareness, some advice on how to do things and make things better, then that's a good option. I think AI in that way will bridge a gap that we've had around the world, where access to information is power, and if people empower themselves and maybe use AI to empower themselves, then that can help empower the organizations that they work in and try to level that playing field. So I guess education ultimately is what I'm going to go for as the best thing, but that is a longer, slower process. It's not something you can flip a switch tomorrow in the world that we live in, unfortunately, but I think we can get there, right?
And
So
just let me jump in here quickly, Chanzu, just to build a bit on your point there. So what has been, I think, for me, fascinating, right? The point around, I guess education, I guess this, I guess another way of talking about it is sophistication, right? Is that, with this exercise that, we're doing with EEGF, what has been particularly interesting for me is when I've started learning more about this, what you find actually is that, when I've seen some statistics around some of where these attacks are happening, it's worldwide, but interestingly, the growth is largely Africa, right? Like it's a lot of what we call emerging markets because, right, there's a bit of that gap between the kind of innovation, the pace at which it is happening, and sort of the data practices, safeguard, and systems safeguard practices, right? There's still that gap. And, my understanding is like with some of this stuff, if you are, cybersecurity attacker, you don't, anything that looks weak is great, right? Anything that looks like it's not, right? And so, and with internet and technology these days, you don't need to dig deep, right? It's just mass sort of do these things and whatever works, right? I just thought that's an interesting thing to pick up on, that when you look, you find that a lot of that, in fact, in terms of numbers, there's fast growth, I would say Africa. But if you look at, depending on the kind of attack, let's say ransomware, which is more like America because that's where money is. So, just to, I thought pick up on that point and say that's one of the key things for me from this exercise, that's been really supported by EEGF, that it's been a bit of that eye opener, right? That, Africa doesn't matter. It's, if your systems are not as seen as weak, then you're going to get a lot of attacks. And at some point, you're going to pay a price for it.
Yeah. That's actually an interesting one. And just still on you, Tukam, it sounds like the companies in Africa, just generally, not even only in Africa, from what you're saying, may not be prioritizing this early enough, because, if we are already getting into a point where they're being attacked, or we need to start educating people down in the line after investment and things like that, what advice would you give them, especially when they rely heavily on, on mobile devices, just tools, basically AI or whatever? So investing in this early, is it education? That's what you're saying? I think I'm trying to frame my question.
No, I think there is an element of education, Chanzu, right? I think the sooner the better, right? Because I think the danger here is that, if some of these attacks or enough of them succeed, you end up with distrust, right? And that distrust is a sure way to hinder innovation, right? And so I would say absolutely that there's definitely education, but I would say like, look, talking about these things that, look, I mean, we had, in our case, somebody reached out as an example, right? Somebody quite important to us and said, look, this is what has, it almost happened to them. Hey, have you received anything like this? Can you check and see, right? And so I think that kind of conversation, right? That I think it's often more vivid when somebody is, who has almost experienced that talks to you about it than, simply just, let me go, I don't know, take a class or sit through, right? That I think just that education would be just being able to talk about it, right? Because I think some of these things is what you hide often repeats itself, right? And others don't, right? It becomes something of shame, right? You can't talk about it because, whoops, so I think that there's education, but I think education is simply not only, learn about these things, but share your experience, right? So that others, because there's often a tendency to think it's happening somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
That it's, it's other people's problem.
And looking at someone who is not in a senior management position, from your point, actually, you're the right person to answer this one. How is the best way to convince like senior management to look into, investing in this, be it whatever, education, or what's the best, what would you advise? What's the best approach? Yeah.
I think for me, look, it's simple. It's like a bit of the point I was making in the beginning. I think if you are a company receiving any kind of funding, and I mean literally any, right? Because whether that's grant or that's debt or that's equity, I think you have a fiduciary responsibility to do the best you can with those funds. And part of doing the best with those funds is protecting that company from such things. As I said, because whether you're a debt investor, a grant provider, or an equity investor, one of your big nightmares is waking up to find out something you backed has not got wrong because they tried their best, but because they were negligent, because they could have done A, B, C, D, and they didn't do that, right? So for me, I think like, look, I know it's a bit of a, big word, but that there's something called fiduciary responsibility, right? And that when you take money from people, you have the responsibility to make sure that it is well used. And part of its well use is that you're building something and doing all you can to protect it from these kinds of attacks, because that damages reputation. And once you damage reputation, you damage trust with your customers, you damage trust with your investors, and that ultimately could lead to your demise as a company, especially if it becomes clear, because when these things happen, as an investor, you will investigate. And you find out that, well, they could have done low-hanging fruit actions A, B, C, and that was never done. That would come across as irresponsible. And when you look irresponsible, well, people don't trust you.
That's clear. You don't invest, you lose money. Sounds motivating enough. Cool. I'm gonna throw this to the panel. Let's see what whoever will take this one. Are there international cybersecurity frameworks specifically aligned with the climate tech sectors or smart energy infrastructure that business should be aware of, especially in Africa? Are there specific laws that we find business overlook that they should know? And is it something that business should be looking out for, or as long as you feel secure, you're fine? Neil, you've worked with
Everyone's been too polite.
yeah.
Yeah. What I tend to, my personal experience is that most companies will do what they think they need to do to keep themselves ahead of the game, to keep themselves secure, and they will just do enough because I mentioned investment. It's all about resources. Cybersecurity has a habit of looking as it's a cost center. You spend money on cybersecurity, and the best outcome is nothing happens. Whereas you innovate, you spend money on AI, on marketing, on things, you invest, you get more money back is the idea. I'm not saying, I think cybersecurity can help protect your investment and take it further, but generally that's the view. And then what I've seen in a lot of the regulated industries that we work in is companies tend to, they do what they need to because they're trying to get their product off the ground or they're trying to get their company working. So they're doing, it's hard to do. And then suddenly they'll hit like a regulatory barrier or they'll hit a law barrier. They'll hit something like they need to get FDA approval or they need to get something, they're operating in a certain country. And I've seen this across different countries, and I'm sure that most come down to the same sort of pattern that most companies will do what they need to do. And then if they're successful or they reach a certain point, then suddenly they go, in the UK, for example, we have the National Health Service, and a lot of medical companies want to get into the NHS. They get their product to a point or their service that it's good enough, and then they would turn to the NHS and say, we would like you to use our service or product in this organization. And then they turn around and say, well, actually, you need to go and get this badge, this framework, and you need to be in adherence with this law. And so to a point, up until that moment, I'm sure they're abiding by the law, but they're not, their focus is getting themselves into a position where they're valuable. And actually that's an interesting time when companies can be quite vulnerable, because everybody's focused on getting the product or the service of the entity to the market. And that's when the dangers, at least I've seen, can happen. And that's not to say once you've got the certification, you're great, but it kicks in at a certain level I've seen across fintech, medtech, and in critical national infrastructure. But in critical national infrastructure, it tends to kick in a lot earlier in the progression in that cycle.
Got it. But that makes sense. But then also the standard frameworks like OWASP, that if you're building software, make sure like it aligns to those. We do have the GDPR, right? And also like country specific, also like guidelines and regulations as well.
Yeah, no, that just to add Chanzu quickly, that was probably, GDPR is probably the closest I would say to, and I mean, I've seen it in a former sort of professional context. I had to deal with it, right? I think that was, it didn't mandate, like certain kinds of protection, but, the implication of what you were required to do was effectively, if you did it well, then you would end up with some kind of, framework, or at least some looking into how do you sort of protect against, right, let's say people's data being stolen and stuff, which is some of the stuff that we've talked about. But as a GDPR is probably in my mind, again, it's not in every country, but a lot of countries are adopting versions of it in sub-Saharan African context that, I think depending on how you apply it could lend itself to sort of things we're talking about.
Yeah, cool. I want to give some time for questions, so I'll just let us quickly finally do a reflection on how things have changed and what's ahead. Starting off with Ben, from where you sit, how has you think the cybersecurity in Africa, how would you think it's going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years in the climate impact sector?
Sure. Yeah, I think there are two aspects that we're going to see changes quite a bit in the next 3 to 5 years. I think the first one is like still threat amplification. I think the AI-powered attacks are going to be more and more common and more sophisticated, which means that we will see, I think, more security breach because there will be more attackers able to do more sophisticated attacks. And I think kind of as a result of that, or at least related, we'll see some increase in like awareness, like companies are becoming more and more aware that, okay, there are more and more phishing attempts against us, there's more and more attack attempts against us, so they're becoming more aware of cybersecurity risk and doing a little bit more training internally. But not only companies, I think governments are also starting to become aware, like we were just talking about, like GDPR. I think we see like projects in several countries for laws related to consumer data protection, not necessarily just in the climate sector, but sometimes related sectors. So like we saw things, for example, in Kenya that are related to whoever is providing some sort of microfinance. So actually, like all the PaygOps solar company would probably fall under that kind of regulation. Where I think it's positive because indeed, as Neil was saying, like companies are not going to do anything unless they see it just as a cost, unless they're kind of forced to do it. So I think it's positive in the sense that it will force companies to adopt preventive measure. But there's also potentially a risk in that the regulation that we see appearing and that might appear in the next few years might be different in each countries, and that might create a lot of regulatory complexity for operators and for software providers to try to comply with those different regulations in different countries. Like some countries, we start seeing they force us to host in the country, and see if each country is doing that, then it might become a problem.
Yeah.
If each country you're operating with force you to host the server physically in their country,
Yeah,
where you
it's
might not
becoming a
even have
very,
good data
yeah.
center, it might become a problem. So yeah, that's about it.
Ashley, do you agree? And do you think there are persistent gaps that need to be looked at in this?
Absolutely, yes. To answer the question around the landscape changing in the past years and the future, I think it in many ways not much has changed. Actually, we've talked a lot about AI and technologies evolving, but actually, if you look historically at the data, the last 10 to 15 years, it's the same stuff. It's what you call, Chanzu, the basics. It's what Token called the low-hanging fruit. It's basically the boring stuff of cybersecurity. It's not sexy. It's stuff like training people, patching software and hardware, passwords. Like still, hackers are logging in and not breaking in, and that's been the case for many years now because we're not very good as humans at remembering good passwords, right? So I would say that the landscape has changed, but it hasn't changed. In the future, it's going to be the same stuff. In Africa specifically, we mentioned earlier that there's a massive loss of cybercrime. I think it's something like 4 billion annually in Africa. And I think those basic controls are the same ones, and they're just as important as well in Africa. And so I think that's the most important thing. Focus on those basics, the low-hanging fruit, the boring stuff. And that's not going to change in the next 5 or 10 years.
Because people are stubborn unless they tie to money. Yeah.
Exactly.
Good. Well, thanks, guys. I really want to give some time for Q&A. I don't know if we have any questions on the chat. Guys, feel free to type any questions to the panel. If they're none, I can continue to ask mine. I have quite a lot. And this goes. Mine is for Tukam here. How has thinking around cybersecurity evolved within the venture ecosystem in Africa? How do you think it's going to evolve in 3 to 5 years? Again, from your perspective, Ashley says, not much will change until people fix the basics. Do you agree with this? Do you think it's bound to be different?
No, I think I largely agree with what Ashley said, right? That, I mean, I think the things that can be done to prevent, right, some of these cyber attacks, I don't think it's going to change that much, at least some of those, what he called, boring stuff, right? That because a lot of it just plays on our human behavior, right? But I think that like the level of threat probably going to unkind's going to change, right? That level in that, I mean, in sort of where I sit as an investor, I mean, most of the new stuff I get now for people looking for money to fund their ventures, right, is a lot of it has some kind of IoT, right? That's the new buzz thing, right? So that means that IoT connectivity, that means, there's going to be more and more data, produced from these things, and meaning, there will be more and more to work with both positively and negatively, right? So positively in the sense of, I don't know, right? Maybe understanding better repayment behavior for your customers, right? Maybe incentivizing your field agents in a better way. But the flip side, negative side, is that it also, right, with all this sort of advancing analysis and algorithms, that there are also going to be more sophisticated ways and AI for people to take advantage, right, of a company and the folks associated with the company. So I'd say that, I think there's probably going to be an acceleration because of the sheer amount of data and communication and digital trail that is going to be, accompanying these innovations that we back. But I think the basic things that can be done to protect oneself, oneself here being a person or a company, are the basic stuff is not going to change that much, right? And I think that if those things are done, while it will not eliminate the threats, I think it would probably take care of a significant and consequential, share of those threats.
Yeah, interesting. I have a question here from Robin Stoker. How do we guard against AI hallucinations? People are lazy and do not perform fact checking due to due diligence, and hallucinations can have a huge negative impact if people take AI output seriously. That could be hallucinations. That's actually a very valid point. Who would like to take this one? How could we guard against hallucinations?
So but again, like in most things, we've got humans and we've got the technical. So on the human point of view, it's making people realize that the AI is imperfect, that it is not sort of what it says is not 100% sort of trustable. I use AI. One example is with our accountant. I sometimes may ask the AI a question, but I will not take that as accounting advice. I will run it by an expert to confirm when it's something that is important. The other side of this is what a lot of the AI companies are doing is they're bringing technologies in like RAG, retrieval augmented generation. They're using internet sources. They're basically sort of fusing the AIs with tools. It doesn't remove hallucinations, but it reduces them. So you ask it a question, it goes and gets several internet sources. Again, we're assuming those internet sources are relatively trustworthy. It takes those internet sources, it mixes it with its own domain knowledge and tries to provide an answer that is a bit more transparent. And again, I think the transparency in where the AI got the information and the thought process behind it is really critical here. There's more thinking models now. You can look at some of the thinking that it's done. Does that mean that it's not going to hallucinate? No. It's reducing the incidences of a hallucination. But this is why always, with anything that you're doing with AI, it's a bit like if you're working with sort of a colleague, a junior colleague maybe, you still have to have your own agency. And we'll get into it. I mean, there's going to be a wider societal problem if we all become very drone-like and we all just do as the AI tells us. And so it's keeping that critical thinking and developing those key skills so that we don't just do as the AI tells us to do. Otherwise, we may sleepwalk into a dystopia.
I see. I like it. So pair your AI your AI tool basically.
It's a tool. Yeah, it is a tool. That is it.
Yeah. Good.
Just sort of
we
one thing to add to that, like just Neil, like I absolutely agree. And for me, it is, again, I like actually the word you use as well, just boring stuff, right? It is boring stuff. If you get stuff, well, try to fact check it, right? It is boring. In this day and age, everybody, all of us feel like we have more important things to do, but fact check it, triangulate, right? Like the fact that something has, put that out there doesn't mean, right? Like, I mean, to me, when I look at a lot of these things, and that's how it's helped me a bit, escape some of these attacks, is I always to look carefully, right? Like, oh, and then is this thing true, right? Like, is this true? And what do I need to try to test to get a sense of, is this true? But, but it is boring stuff, right? It's right?
do the boring stuff. Yeah, so one last one here. As a small business, at what point do you stop relying on your developers for security and hire a security expert to help you secure your software, platforms, product, etc. At what point do you stop relying on your developers for security and actually hire a security expert? In 2.5 minutes. Ashley, sounds like you want to take
I'll do it faster than that. So I think one way of answering this is you never really stop relying on them. I think it's super important that you do rely on them and work with them. But to answer your question, I would say if that software platform products that you mentioned is critical to your day-to-day operations and your revenue or your reputation as a company, then it's probably already worth spending a bit of money on getting a specialist in. I mean, you can get a security review for $3,000 to $5,000, for example. So if that's feasible, I think it's worth doing, just to give you the peace of mind of, okay, are there any gaps that we've missed, perhaps? But I would say always keep working with the developers and make sure that they are also exposed to training, so they know what are the latest causes of breaches from a software point of view. So someone else mentioned earlier OWASP. That's, for example, a really good resource for seeing what are the software flaws that are most common. So making sure your developers are aware of that stuff and using it in their day-to-day and integrating security into their kind of day-to-day code releases. That's what I would say.
So don't give up on your developers, but depending on how important your systems are and how the levels of education they are, you can mix or choose the two. Got it.
Summarized perfectly, just like ChatGPT.
Thanks, guys. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this session. And on behalf of Persistent, I want to thank everyone for joining us and the panelists as well for your time. Thank you again, Benjamin, Ashley, Tukam, and Neil. To the audience, we hope this discussion, will help move cybersecurity discussions in your organizations up the agenda. If you have any questions, we will send a survey after this that you can respond to with further follow-up questions. If you'd like to learn more also about the companies that were represented here as well, you can. We will include links in the survey as well. Please don't forget to fill the feedback. And yeah, are there any closing remarks from anyone? We are right at the top, right on time.
Just one really quick thing from me is to check out the publication that Persistent have shared. It actually has all of the basics and the research we've talked about for African SMEs from a security point of view. So definitely check that out.
Yeah, that just stole it out of my mouth, actually. I was going to say, please take a look. A lot of these things we've talked about, I think they're, in fact, I mean, with EEGF support, of course, there's lots of work being done to provide a basic, tool that could help with some of these initial assessments. It's certainly not a perfect tool, but that can help. And then before you then decide whether, you need to go for the big guns or not.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and if you didn't get the publication, we will share it out to all the attendees after, including the recording. Otherwise, have a great day, and until next time, stay secure, keep building a safer, more resilient climate sector. See you guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.